Welcome to the Sci-Fi, a podcast about black science fiction, fantasy, and staying on the same page in this marriage, baby. I am one of your incredible hosts, Amber Wallen.
And I'm Ben.
Welcome to the show, Ben. And welcome to the show, listeners. This is episode 18. We sat down and watched the movie An Oversimplification of Her Beauty by Terence Nance. It was written by him and directed by him. And we have a lot of thoughts. Today we will discuss The Bane of My Existence, an arthouse film. A film that could have been a fucking poem or an adolescent journal. We will discuss this puke fest of a movie. Ben, you love this pretentious movie. Talk to me about it, please, because I'm over it.
I loved this movie.
It was too much. And it was painful to watch.
What do you mean by too much?
I understand, like, these movies are important and there's this, like, artistic noir and all of that kind of stuff, but it felt like one big acid trip. It wasn't a narrative or a story about characters. It was just reflection. It was somebody's diary on screen. That's what I was watching.
But who is the character in a diary? The person writing it.
Yeah, but we learned little to nothing about our actual character. I don't want to read someone's diary, and I struggled through this movie. If you have seen this movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it's a student film. It's real psychedelic, but ultimately it's hard to watch. Like, every couple of seconds we were like pausing. How much time is left? I'm dead. I'm out of gas with this.
There is very much a plot and a narrative and characters.
What was the plot?
So the plot is...
Yeah, why don't you give the people a background? Because if you're listening to this, I dare you, I will pay you $5 to go watch this movie in its whole. And a part of that dare is you can't press pause and see how much time is left. And I bet it will be hard for them to sit through. Go ahead, though. Tell the people the plot, because I actually want to know.
To be honest, Amber, I actually had to write out the summary because it was so convoluted.
So you agree?
No, I don't agree with you. I'm saying that it's convoluted and complicated, so I had to write out the plot to know what was happening. So this is what I wrote. A struggling art student makes an art film called How Would You Feel to get a girl to fall in love with him even though the girl is already dating someone else. That sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Right? But that film is presented as a metaphor about the fracturing love between two people, and it's presented at a theater as a student film. But then that student film, How Would You Feel, is part of the larger film, An Oversimplification of Her Beauty, which is analyzing their friendship and love over the 3 years. So How Would You Feel is a film made in 1 year, and Oversimplification of Her Beauty includes the film How Would You Feel, but it's layered with animation and reflections that comment on the smaller student film. And the larger plot of it, this is sort of a big part, is that the film How Would You Feel is presented as metaphor, but it's actually truly about the boy and the girl. So when people watch the film, they think it's just this musing on relationships and the fracturing of relationships, but actually it is almost autobiographical. And so the
AKA a damn snooze fest. You know it was a struggle to get through this film. And I appreciate indie films. I definitely think there's a place for them. I appreciate student films. Like, those stories deserve to be told, but this was just frustrating and a drag and pretentious. And, you know, I hate poetry, so it was just a movie of pure, it was all poetry. Sorry if you have not seen it and don't plan to see it based on this review. Spoiler. The entire movie isn't like characters talking back and forth. It's one long narration from, and it's all poetry. So it's all slant rhymes and what is it? Iambic pentameter and all that stuff. And I was just like, if you want to watch someone do spoken word for 85 minutes, this is your movie. Because I can't. Tell me what you...
You didn't like the part how he is trying to create this Japanese woodwork bed, and he has to move the pieces piece by piece in New York City because he doesn't have a car, and he's creating this whole bed because he expects this girl, Namik, to come over and, you know, cuddle with him in the bed, and he actually is unable to create the bed because he's a terrible carpenter, and that's sort of a reflection on his inability really to woo this girl. You didn't like that when he kept on going back and forth in the subway?
Let's see. Do I enjoy watching someone try to construct a bed, carrying pieces one by one, and ultimately failing? No. Because what does that say about my life? It says that if I try to put something together, I'll probably fail. I enjoyed it as much as I enjoy a new IKEA piece coming and reading those instructions to put that bed together and failing. That was the same effect for me.
But the fact that it's sort of a metaphor of his inability to woo the woman he loves. He didn't.
And it's that too. It's like, is this woman, are you in love with this woman? You're a young college student who's an artist. You don't know her. I think he knew her for like 3 weeks, and he's like obsessed with her and in love with her. And she's sort of like moved on. So in a lot of ways, I felt like this girl is like, she started trying to date you for 3 weeks, realized that you were filming her life, and then she backed out a little bit. She was like, okay, let me back up, because this guy is like this very deep artist, but he's also kind of a stalker and filming all of our interactions. Oh, great. Now he's presenting those interactions at a student film fest. Like, imagine you going to hook up with somebody in college, and then they turn that into a student film, and later into a bigger, longer, more frustrating film that got put on Amazon Prime.
That's definitely a theme. Like, what's the ethics of storytelling? Can you tell a story about someone without them knowing? Because in some sense, she knows that she's being filmed. Namik knows that she's being filmed. Mm-hmm. And later, when she watches the first student film, How Would You Feel? Terence ends up interviewing her and putting that interview about her response to watching this very personal story presented as a metaphor, but actually it is a reality of their relationship and the fracturing of their relationship. He interviews her about her reaction, and she's like, I felt sort of taken advantage of, and she expresses those feelings, and then later she ends up saying, I want to have a part of filming my perspective. And there's a little bit of the switching of the narrator, because over the whole movie, you have this person narrating, and it goes back and forth between a deep voice-over narrator that you would hear on a National Geographic channel. Namik ends up getting a little bit of her perspective told throughout the story.
And what was that? What was that perspective? Because I missed it between all of the clouds and the stars and the poetry.
I think
God, I hate poetry. I really wish I could enjoy it.
I think her perspective was that she sees this brilliant artist with a fantastic imagination, and she's drawn to him to an extent, but she doesn't see him as a love interest. She sees him as a really good friend. And he is, at one point he says, I was friend zoned. But I think that's a little bit too simplistic for her. I think she actually sees him as a legitimate, caring, loving friend who is someone that she wants to keep in her life, but I don't think she wants to have sex with him.
What do you think were the 3 big takeaways of this film? Because even with themes, like, for this discussion, we're all over the place because the movie was so all over the place. So I want you to reel it in and give me the 3 big takeaways. 3 keys.
3
that
keys.
I was supposed to walk away from as a person that does not watch student film, not a big, like, noir, artsy, slam poetry girl. 3 keys.
Okay, the first key is that artists oftentimes and creators oftentimes confuse their objects and subjects, and therefore dehumanize the humans in which they're reflecting on. Perfect example of that is at one point he's describing, quote, an archetype of a woman that he loves. And he says, the women I keep on falling in love with are brown, maternal, well-read, and well-traveled. And that's a great line because it's really reflective on his inability to actually see them as individual people. That's a big part.
Because they have to have these markers.
Exactly. This is a big theme of it, that straight men objectify women and try to find their muse, you know, and their
groundbreaking.
Their muse is going.
I've never heard of that idea.
But I think he's clowning that idea because ultimately the title is an oversimplification, and so he talks about like 7 women that he has dated, and they're just objects to him. They're not really characters, right? There's only 2 characters to this, Terence and Namik, and so it just it felt funny to me when he sort of makes a reflection on them because he completely misses an opportunity to create them as a character. And I think he's maybe commenting on art, especially male artists who obsess over a muse. He only sees her as an object for his subject of ruminating on how relationships work, because she is one of many women that he reflects on.
Yes.
And he also has this conceit where some humans are drawn as planets, and then some humans are satellites going around the planets. And one of the trippy animation scenes, which is speculative as fuck. The whole movie is just this speculation.
Could you explain to our listeners and me what speculative is?
Speculative,
because that's what makes it sci-fi or fantasy, right?
Right.
Okay.
Speculative is simply imagining worlds that have not yet been, or may be, or will never be. So humans aren't planets, but when you use that as a metaphor that humans either have this gravitational pulling, right, as a planet, or they're satellites where they're just languidly revolving around other planets. So that dichotomy of 2 people and how they approach relationships, I thought was a really beautiful image.
Oh, God. I get frustrated with these movies because I don't feel smart enough to watch them. And I know I'm too impatient to watch them. Like that part I'm okay with knowing, right? Like because of the daily scrolling and the daily zooming, I think I don't have the capacity and the attention span to give the movie what it requires from me as an audience member, which then the onus is on the director to meet me halfway and to meet other audience members halfway. And I just don't feel like he did that or wanted to do that. I think he's like, I'm going to tell this very obscure, absurd story. If you get it, great. If you don't, great. Which is fine, but it's just like, this is not going to lead to a lot of people watching this film, which is sad. Like, we had to find it first. You know, we had to really dig deep, and then we had to look at some of these reviews that were like, this is very frustrating, but also beautiful and smart and funny, but it's just a mind fuck to get through. I guess it's like, should we still create art if nobody can understand it? Like, of course, but...
It's definitely a movie you would go watch at the Art Institute. Yes. On like a Thursday night that's presented only inside the museum. Or it's like one of those films that you walk into an exhibit and you go into the dark room and they have the film playing on the screen and people sit down for 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And they're so confused and they've only watched about an hour of paint just dripping, filmed like off the wall or something. Something ridiculous. But then you have to bring your own self into this work. Like, this film is not a straight narrative, so as you watch it, you have to basically bring a notebook and your reading glasses and engage with the film. It requires you to pay attention, and it requires you to think. Number 2, the inevitable demise of relationships. In any relationship, someone is going to be growing up as a giant and shrinking down into
in any relationship.
In any relationship. I think in his relationship as well. And I think it sometimes sort of goes back and forth, like one person's shrinking, one person is expanding, but then it might switch, and as the other person shrinks and the other person expands, there might be a moment where they really see each other at the same level, but then it's unequal again, and there's this constant fluctuating.
So to recap, the first key is that
artists
are assholes. The
Creatives.
second key...
That would include you as well, because you're a creative.
I've been an asshole. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's the first
Writers,
key.
all of them.
Because we see... I can really relate with that, because sometimes I'll see something and I'm just like, ugh, I want to make a joke about this, but this is inappropriate. So you do have to tap on that line. 2, I understand. The second key. In relationships, it'll fluctuate between growing and shrinking in relation to each person.
What about the scene where people approach relationships where they actually see another person as a giant? So there's this beautiful image where he is starting to break up with another character as a metaphor, and he and this character are constantly growing and shrinking in this animation, and it's very creepy and sad. But also I know lots of people who literally feel small, or they say, oh, you made me feel small, and he ends up shrinking into like nothingness until he completely disappears.
I think if he were to break this whole movie up into smaller parts, I would have found the beauty of that scene. Because it was beautifully animated. That story was told in its 5-minute pocket. But what you have is, I mean, it's the same thing. Ben knows I was in this show one time about like Firefest or whatever. It was like a musical parody. And it was bad. The show was bad. Even though it was an all-star cast of actors and improvisers. But the way that we wrote the show was, our director was like, hey, everybody has 2 hours to write. So go to your corners, write for 2 hours. We would go write for 2 hours. We would all come back. And everything that we wrote in our separate corners got put into the show. It didn't matter if it was cohesive. It didn't matter if it was thematic. Everybody, he wanted everybody to feel like they were a part of the writing process and the creative process. So there was no real vetting of like, actually your storyline doesn't tie in well with my storyline. It was like, nope, let's put in sugar and spice and heat and savor. And so you went to the show. It was a hodgepodge of several people's stories. That's what this felt like, because all of the animations were powerful and beautiful, but they were all stylistically, you can tell that they were done by different animators. One was even sort of like a claymation versus like sketches. So all of those separate pieces of animation, it sounds like Terence Nance said, hey, I want 9 animators to come and draw this story of my life. Everybody's going in.
You know, he's the artist for everything.
He's the artist for everything.
Yeah.
That's shocking to me.
Really?
I think we should go confirm that, because the styles of animation were so different.
Right. There was stop motion and color animation.
And claymation.
Yeah.
So he does claymation. He does.
Yeah.
Well, we got ourselves like a very artistic Tyler Perry situation here, where it's like you need a writer's room and you need a team of collaborators that work together, that self-edit, that like, hey, this is a joke on the table. Who can beat it? Like, he needs a room or something, because it just doesn't feel like it works as one big cohesive piece. That scene that you're talking about, beautiful, standalone. But I had to like trudge through. I feel like I'm crawling like elbows with like an army guy under a net. I had to trudge through sludge to get to that scene. So at that point, it wasn't worth it to me. And what was the third big, you got to decide, because there were so many keys.
The third big takeaway is texting is not a way to communicate your love. Time travel, especially in today's day and age of texting and Facebook and Twitter and all these social media accounts, and this idea that we can actually pause our life, go back a year in review, very similar to what Facebook does when they show up on your timeline. This is what you did a year ago. That is a form of time travel. So throughout this film, you as a viewer are paused, and there's a literal pause button and a rewind button. And so the movie becomes non-linear at points because the creation of the film is done 3 years after the original student film. But I think he is saying something that we get to go back and reflect on our life in a way that humans have not been able to do because the visual media is so accessible now, right? It's in our phone, right? We have you made me get the new iPhone 37, which has been the bane of my existence because I can do so much on it and I can record every moment of my life. But when we go back and spend all the hours reflecting, we put a pause on living the here and now life. And I think there's a commentary going on there. Because when this movie is made, again, social media hasn't taken a hold in the same way that it's done now. This was made 10 years ago, and it's being made right on the cusp of this. So I thought that was a beautiful reflection on time travel. But when you time travel, you're putting a pause on the life that you currently live. What did you think about that? Did you pick up on that?
I liked the cinematic. There was so much cinematic effects and things like that. I did enjoy the pause and eject only because, like in this podcast, when you have those sound bites, they break up and help chunk the material. So I liked it for that purpose because in my brain I was like, okay, we just paused and ejected. That means that volume was done. But I still had no clue how to budget my time as a viewer, and it was very challenging for my attention span. I didn't take that pause and eject as a social commentary at all. Oh. Because I know that this was him putting many small films together, that's like, okay, that's the end of that film. Go put the next one on. It was like it's 1995 and I'm just watching VHS tapes with my parents. It's like, oh, well, we just watched Alicia's baptism and now go ahead and put on the family reunion tape. Okay, next one put on, because they were all so different from each other.
Okay.
It was just small stories.
Understood. What about this whole idea, which is a reflection on you, because you are often filming our life, like every day you're filming our life. And sometimes I don't always know you're filming our life. And sometimes you film things and I say and do things and I'm like, ooh, I don't want that out there. Mm-hmm. And that's a big theme of this, because Terence is filming Namik at times, and she didn't know that all this was going to be put out there and that student film as How Do You Feel? And I thought that was pretty great. And then at one point he interviews her, and during that whole interview, he's asking her, how did you feel about seeing your life put on display? And I thought that was really fantastic. But it made me think of an episode in Family Matters. You've seen Family Matters?
Yeah.
And so, you know, the
I'm just shocked that my was shocked that you had. Yes. Okay.
So you know the daughter
Laura Winslow. Mm-hmm.
She ends up writing a book at one point. She writes a book at one point, and all the family thinks that they're characters in the book. And so she's like reading the book, and she's like, no, it's fiction. And there's a dad in the book, so the description of the dad, it's just really funny, and it sort of mirrors him, but it doesn't really mirror the dad. And he gets really mad, and the mom gets really mad, and she's like written this book of fiction, but because she's probably put each of her family in there, they all get like really pissed off. And it's just a really hilarious moment for writers or authors to be reflective of like, I need to be careful who I put in this book. Like, who's going to read this, you know?
I mean, Terence didn't do any of that. He recorded a girl kind of without her permission and then released a student film.
But I think an oversimplification of her beauty is an apology to that.
Well, was it a love letter or an apology? I don't know.
Okay, let's go into size.
I love the movie, of course.
There's not a whole lot of narrative,
Yes.
so that's a big sigh.
Huge sigh. The characters. Okay, this is something that is a sigh and not just me complaining about it. Terence is the only character with a voice. So he's trying to teach us this lesson that, like, these women aren't just your musings. Like, they have their own ideas and voices and whatever, but the only women in this film that have voices are the ones that, like, he has sat down to interview, which is just not Meek. Like, all these other women don't get to have a story. Like, that's why the theme of your art isn't just objects didn't land with me, because he made them just objects.
Right, which is inevitable. That's inevitable as an artist. And you have to confront that and deal with that.
I mean, this whole thing is just like one big circle.
Yeah.
I see where you're going, where he's trying to, like, find this, like, dramatic irony. But that is lost on the viewer because he's trying to teach us too many lessons.
It's exhausting,
It's
right?
exhausting.
Maybe it wasn't in his budget to get more characters.
It's just somebody saying, like, well, I stole from you, but I admitted to stealing from you, so that's cool, right? It's like, no. It's like, well, I did this thing wrong, but I'm aware of it. Like, so do I get a star for being aware? No, not really. Like, how could I treat this as irony if there's no, like, justice in it either?
Again, that's more of a theme.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a sigh.
I think it's a sigh. I think the movie was just too dense. Okay, well, that's my big sigh, that you want these women to not be so simplified, but you didn't really write them into the story of your reflections in your brain. Like, they were objects in your story, and you wanted a gold star for admitting that they were objects. I don't know. Weird.
It really begs the question for me if it's ever possible to create a film in which you are not objectifying. Because as soon as you pull out the lens, and there's this recurring image of the lens, as soon as you pull out the lens and start filming, the light that hits the individual and goes back into your screen as an image immediately becomes an object. Yeah. Like, the actual physical process of filming objectifies whoever you're filming. And that is very...
In any case.
It's very disturbing.
So you don't think it helps, like, discover and reveal and promote? Because I love watching, I don't know, like, Wild Wild Country and seeing, like, oh my gosh, if this recording device if this moment in history was not captured, this could have been lost.
Right. And so
I don't look at that as, like,
there's a
this
trade-off.
Community. Yeah.
There's a trade-off, right? Because even in Wild Wild Country, the documentary about the Rajneesh people, it is still a objectification, right? Okay. We're still watching it. There's a level of, like, pornographic pleasure to it, because you do see a demise of an entire group of people. You do see homeless people find a home, they become homeless again. And it's done for your pleasure as a viewership, and that's pornographic. You are seeing trauma, and you're seeing objects go through trauma, and you are distanced from that trauma, because as soon as you finish watching the film, you can go order pizza. And that itself is pornographic. You can do that with any film. Any film. Schindler's List. Schindler's List. You watch Schindler's List.
Talk about Schindler's List.
You watch Schindler's List. You see this terrible, awful happening. It's pornographic. No way you can get around it. Because when you're done with Schindler's List, you can go to Lickety Split and get some of that ice cream.
But you can also go to donation pages and GoFundMes.
Yeah, but that's...
You can't. I'm just saying, like, in the same way that you can go completely ignore what you just watched, you can also dig deeper into what you just consumed.
there's something so grotesque when you put GoFundMe next to Holocaust or GoFundMe next to some sort of traumatic happening. I don't know.
Why?
There's
People
a
need
trade-off.
funds.
There's a trade-off. There's a trade-off that you are doing this. It's not either or, it's both and type of thing where you are pornographically engaging in this person's trauma. In this case, an oversimplification of her beauty, you're engaging in the trauma of a breakup. You're engaging in the trauma of Namik feeling that she's becoming an object, because it's very clear that she feels that she's an object, and she expresses that to Terence in the film, which is sort of a little bit of an equalizer as well. Really enough said on that, because we're still on the thematic issue. The repetition of imagine.
Yes, what
was
is it? Hamilton?
Yeah. The repetition of the narrator was a little exhausting. It could have been cut down 30 minutes. I would have loved to have more
30.
animation. It was only an hour and a half.
It could have been all animation. I'm always worried when when a film is like starring, directed by, written by, voiceovers by, and it's all the same person. I'm like, oh, brother. So
one thing I didn't know how to handle, and I thought this could have been actually a good thing, the only relationship that we see successful is a queer relationship. So Terence is dating someone, and they break up, and the woman he's dating, I don't remember her name.
Of course you don't.
Because it's very quickly said. She ends up seeing someone else, but she sees a woman. And that sort of could have been a reflection that maybe this is the demise of straight relationships, that all straight relationships are going to fall apart and be destroyed just because of the inevitable power imbalance between male and female bodied people. That was an idea, possibly a theme.
Maybe that's why he included that, but he didn't explore it.
He
got overwhelmed.
Well, because the film is his film. It's about him. He's entirely self-obsessed. It's all about him.
Yep.
And he makes
I said that. I was like, this is narcissistic and arrogant, and I think I don't know. It's so sad because I want to support a black director, a young black director with new ideas and new energy, but this being his first project, I have no desire to watch anything else that he's put out. And I've heard great things about Random Acts of Flyness, but watching this made me think like, I don't even want to give it a chance.
But he made this movie when he was like in his 20s.
I know. I shouldn't be so hard on him, but like it's really hard because it just didn't land on me. You know what I'm saying? It landed with you. I'm not saying that it doesn't work for anybody. I'm just saying this type of film is not for me.
Yeah, it's really for men who want to be artists.
Like the first thing I said, I was like, I am not high enough to watch this movie. Like this is one big acid trip, and I know the people who would really enjoy this. I know the people that would argue hours after this movie and say that it was the most incredible thing they ever seen. I'm just not one of those people. It just was not for me. So it's like, Terence, I wish you all the best. You're far more successful than I am. I could probably learn something from you, but this ain't my kind of party. And on that note, why don't you warp up the show, baby?
Again, I had to write the warp up because this movie was really hard to watch.
Oh, fuck off. Because you were the main one saying like, oh, I would watch it again. Oh,
I would. There are lots of books that I've read that are hard to read, and I would read them again because I felt like I missed things. Anyway.
No, life is too short. I got some reality trash to watch.
Is an experimental film. It is a film of camp and irony. Don't watch unless you have a fucking notebook with you. Every scene is laced in metaphor, but you better bring the reading glasses and a lot of grace with you.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Sci-Fi Side. We had 2 stinkers in a row, folks, but next week you do not want to miss it, because episode 19, we sat down to interview award-winning author Nance Shaw. Nance Shaw has tons of incredible books, but we sat down and read their book, Talk Like a Man. So be sure to read Talk Like a Man and come check out episode 19. We'll see y'all next time. Bye, y'all.